Venezuela's president has a warning for the United States.
Hoy estamos más fuertes que ayer.
The United States just attacked Venezuela's capital, hitting military facilities in the country.
Nicolas Maduro has arrived in New York hours after President Trump announced the U.S. had captured Venezuela's president after launching strikes on the country.
Venezuela sits just 1,300 miles from U.S. shores, closer than the distance from Washington to Denver. The country holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, 303 billion barrels, and has been designated a primary adversary by Washington since 2019. President Nicolas Maduro's government commands a military of approximately 350,000 active personnel, backed by a national militia numbering 1.6 million. Yet Pentagon contingency planning for regime change exists, confirmed by leaked documents in 2023. The question is not whether the United States possesses the military capability to invade Venezuela. It clearly does. The question is whether invasion would achieve strategic objectives without triggering catastrophic consequences across economic, political, and military dimensions. With U.S. forces stretched across Europe and the Pacific, with regional allies opposed to intervention, and with Venezuela's terrain favoring defenders, what would an invasion actually require? And more critically, what happens after the first bombs fall? Venezuela's Bolivarian armed forces number approximately 350,000 active personnel. This places Venezuela as the fifth largest military in Latin America, behind Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Argentina. But raw numbers tell only part of the story. The equipment inventory reflects decades of Russian and Chinese arms purchases. The Venezuelan Air Force operates 23 Sukhoi Su-30MK, two multi-role fighters acquired between 2006 and 2008. Range 1,900 miles with external fuel tanks. Armament R-77 medium-range air-to-air missiles, KH-31 anti-ship missiles. Venezuela also maintains approximately 50 aging F-16AB, Fighting Falcons purchased from the United States in the 1,980 though spare parts sanctions since 2006 have rendered most non-operational. Air defense systems include the Russian S-300VM purchased in 2013, range 125 miles against aircraft, 25 miles against ballistic missiles. Venezuela deployed these systems around Caracas, Maracaibo, and key oil infrastructure. The country also operates Chinese HQ, 7 short-range systems, and legacy Soviet-era SA-6 batteries. Ground forces maintain approximately 390 main battle tanks, primarily T-72B1 models from Russia. Artillery includes BM-21 Grad, multiple rocket launchers, and 2 S-19 EMSTA self-propelled howitzers, but maintenance has deteriorated significantly since 2015. According to Pentagon assessments published in 2022, operational readiness across Venezuelan armored and mechanized forces likely sits below 40%. The National Bolivarian Militia represents Venezuela's unique defensive asset. Established in 2008 and expanded dramatically after 2015, the militia officially numbers 1.6 million members, organized into territorial defense units across all 23 states. Training emphasizes urban warfare, infrastructure sabotage, and irregular combat tactics. Cuban advisors, maintaining a presence in Venezuela since the early 2000s, have provided doctrine development and tactical instruction. Venezuela's geography offers significant defensive advantages. To the north, a 1,750-mile Caribbean coastline features multiple deep-water ports, but limited landing beaches suitable for amphibious operations. The Andes mountain range dominates the western third of the country, with peaks exceeding 16,000 feet, creating natural barriers and observation positions. To the south and east, the Orinoco River Basin and Amazon jungle cover approximately 45% of Venezuela's territory. Terrain that heavily favors defenders and limits mechanized warfare. Caracas presents particular challenges. The capital sits in a narrow valley at 3,000 feet elevation, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and coastal ranges to the north. Population: approximately 3 million in the city proper, 5.2 million in the metropolitan area. Urban density in core districts exceeds 50,000 people per square mile. Venezuelan military doctrine, revised extensively between 2010 and 2015, emphasizes urban defense in depth using militia forces dispersed across neighborhoods, government buildings, and infrastructure choke points. Coastal defense capabilities include Chinese C-802 anti-ship missiles with a range of 75 miles and Russian Club-N missiles with ranges up to 136 miles. Venezuela has positioned mobile launchers along the northern coast, particularly defending approaches to La Guaira, Puerto Cabello, and Lake Maracaibo oil terminals. Oil infrastructure presents both a target and a vulnerability. Venezuela's petroleum facilities span the country. Maracaibo Basin in the northwest, Orinoco Belt in the east, refineries at Paraguaná, Puerto La Cruz, and El Palito. Total installed refining capacity, approximately 1.3 million barrels per day, though actual throughput has declined to 400,000 barrels per day due to maintenance failures and sanctions. Venezuelan defense doctrine includes contingency plans for oil facility sabotage to deny infrastructure to invading forces. Yet Venezuelan military effectiveness faces severe constraints. Economic collapse since 2014 has devastated defense budgets. Soldier pay averages $30 to $50 per month. Desertion rates, particularly among junior enlisted personnel, approach 15 to 20% annually. Ammunition. Stockpiles have deteriorated. Fuel shortages affect training operations. The question becomes whether terrain, militia mobilization, and asymmetric doctrine can compensate for obsolete equipment, poor maintenance, and questionable unit cohesion. Venezuela's military cannot defeat U.S. forces in conventional combat, but delaying, dispersing, and inflicting costs through irregular warfare remains within reach, particularly if operations extend into urban terrain and the defender accepts significant infrastructure destruction. But military capability is only one dimension of intervention feasibility. Legal, political, economic constraints create barriers that conventional superiority cannot overcome. International law presents the first obstacle. The United Nations Charter, Article 2.4, prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Exceptions exist only for self-defense under Article 51 or Security Council authorization under Chapter 7. Venezuela has not attacked the United States or any U.S. ally. It poses no imminent military Talleres-Stepan threat to American territory. Any invasion would require either fabricating a self-defense justification or obtaining Security Council approval, a near impossibility given Russian and Chinese veto power. The Organization of American States, representing 35 Western Hemisphere nations, has explicitly rejected military intervention in Venezuela. In 2019, OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro called for peaceful democratic transition, but the organization's charter prohibits the SURF, use of force to resolve disputes. Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, the 3 largest regional powers, have stated opposition to military action. Without regional support, the United States would operate in diplomatic isolation, unprecedented in Latin American interventions since the Cold War. U.S. domestic legal requirements add further constraints. The War Powers Resolution requires the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces and limits deployments to 60 days without congressional authorization. Venezuela presents no emergency justifying unilateral executive action. Congressional debate would expose deep divisions. Authorization votes remain uncertain at best. Economic disruption presents calculable costs. Venezuela currently produces approximately 700,000 barrels of oil per day, down from 3.2 million barrels per day in 1998, but still significant to global markets. Invasion would halt production entirely. Oil facilities would face sabotage by Venezuelan forces, deliberate destruction to deny resources to invaders. According to Energy market analysts, removing 700,000 barrels per day from global supply could drive prices to $120 to $150 per barrel, adding $1.50 to $2 per gallon at U.S. gas pumps. Refugee flows compound humanitarian concerns. Venezuela has already generated 7.7 million refugees since 2015, the second largest displacement crisis globally after Syria. Invasion and subsequent instability could displace an additional 3 to 5 million people. Colombia, already hosting 2.5 million Venezuelan refugees, lacks capacity to absorb more. The United States would confront a refugee surge at its southern border, dwarfing previous migrant crises. China and Russia hold substantial economic stakes in Venezuela. Chinese companies have invested over $60 billion in Venezuelan oil infrastructure since 2007, with outstanding loans exceeding $20 billion. Russia's Rosneft maintains significant operations in the Orinoco Belt, has provided $17 billion in financing. Beijing and Moscow would view U.S. military action as a direct challenge to their economic interests, potentially triggering diplomatic retaliation. Arms, supplies to Venezuelan resistance forces, or escalatory actions elsewhere. Regional leftist governments would almost certainly support Venezuelan resistance. Cuba maintains deep military and intelligence ties with Caracas. Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega, Bolivia's Luis Arce have condemned U.S. sanctions and supported Maduro diplomatically. These governments could provide safe havens for Venezuelan government in exile, facilitate arms transfers, or offer staging areas for insurgent operations. The precedent question looms over any decision. If the United States invades Venezuela without UN authorization, without regional support, and without a direct security threat, what message does that send to Russia regarding Ukraine, to China regarding Taiwan, or to any nation regarding territorial sovereignty? These non-military factors create a strategic environment where tactical military success might prove strategically catastrophic. Defeating Venezuelan armed forces is achievable. Managing the international, regional, economic, and humanitarian consequences remains far less certain. U.S. Southern Command, headquartered in Miami, Florida, maintains operational responsibility for Latin America and the Caribbean, but Southcom operates with minimal, permanently assigned forces compared to other combatant commands. The command structure includes approximately 1,200 military and civilian personnel focused primarily on security cooperation, counter-narcotics operations, and humanitarian assistance. For actual combat operations, Southcom must request forces from US-based units and other commands. Naval assets would form the initial response, a carrier strike group, typically the USS George Washington or USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, operating from Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, sits approximately 1,800 nautical miles from Venezuela. Transit time at 25 knots. Approximately 3 days to reach operational positions off the Venezuelan coast. Each carrier strike group includes one Nimitz-class carrier with 60 to 70 aircraft, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and 1 attack submarine. Air power would deploy from multiple bases: Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida and Eglin Air Force base host F-22 Raptors and F-35 a Lightning IIs. Flight time to Venezuelan airspace: approximately 2.5 to 3 hours with aerial refueling. Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Maintains B-52H Stratofortresses and B-1B Lancers capable of carrying 20 to 24 AGM-158. JASSM cruise missiles each. Ground force requirements present more substantial challenges. Pentagon estimates for regime: change in initial stabilization operations range from 150,000 to 200,000 troops. For comparison, Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 employed 250,000 personnel to invade and occupy a country with similar population but different terrain. Venezuela's 28 million people, mountainous geography, and jungle coverage suggest force requirements at the higher end of estimates. The 82nd Airborne Division from Fort Liberty, North Carolina, and the 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, provide rapid deployment capability. Combined strength: approximately 30,000 troops capable of deploying within 18 to 96 hours. But airborne forces lack heavy armor and sustained logistics necessary for prolonged urban combat. Amphibious assault would require Marine Expeditionary Units. The U.S. Marine Corps maintains 3 MEUs in rotation, each with approximately 2,200 Marines and associated aviation and logistics support. Deploying 2 to 3 MEUs would provide 4,400 to 6,600 troops for initial beach landings and port seizure operations. Logistics present the binding constraint. Sustaining 150,000 troops requires approximately 40,000 to 50,000 tons of supplies per day, including fuel, ammunition, food, water, and medical materials. The Caribbean offers limited staging infrastructure. Puerto Rico's Roosevelt Roads Naval Station closed in 2004. Remaining facilities at Fort Buchanan can support limited operations but lack capacity for major combat logistics. Colombia presents the most viable staging option. The United States maintains access to Palancaro Air Base and Tolomita Air Base under the 2009 Defense Cooperation Agreement. These facilities could support airlift operations and serve as forward logistics hubs, but Colombian political support remains uncertain. Securing basing rights would require intensive diplomatic negotiations and potentially financial compensation or security guarantees. Sealift capacity limits deployment speed. The Military Sealift Command operates approximately 15 large, medium-speed, roll-on, roll-off ships capable of transporting armored vehicles and heavy equipment. Each ship carries approximately 300 to 400 vehicles. Deploying a mechanized brigade requires 3 to 4 ships and 10 to 14 days transit time from East Coast ports to Venezuelan waters. Timeline estimates vary depending on mission scope. A punitive air campaign targeting Venezuelan military infrastructure could begin within 48 to 72 hours of presidential authorization. But a full-scale invasion requiring ground force seizure of Caracas would need 3 to 4 weeks of force buildup before D-Day operations could commence. For comparison, Operation Desert Shield in 1990 required 6 months to deploy coalition forces before offensive operations began. Venezuela offers no such advantages. Every piece of equipment, every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition must transit 1,300 to 2,000 miles from U.S. territory. The capability exists, but the timeline and logistics requirements would telegraph American intentions weeks before operations could realistically begin. U.S. invasion doctrine begins with air supremacy. Joint operational planning divides military campaigns into distinct phases, each with specific objectives and timelines. Phase I would focus on establishing air dominance and degrading Venezuelan command, and duration 48 to 72 hours. The initial strike package would include $300 to $500 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from destroyers and submarines positioned in the Daki-Y Caribbean, AGM-158. JASSM cruise missiles from B-1B bombers would supplement naval launches. Target priorities follow joint doctrine established in operations from the Gulf War through Libya. First wave, integrated air defense systems. Venezuelan S-300 VM batteries around Dupe, Caracas, Maracaibo, and Valencia. HQ-7 short-range systems protecting key infrastructure. Early warning radars at Maiquetía, Margarita Island, and along the Colombian border. Second wave targets command and control nodes. Presidential Palace in Caracas, Ministry of Defense headquarters, regional military command centers, telecommunications hubs. The objective is decapitation, disrupting Venezuelan leadership's ability to coordinate defensive operations. Third wave focuses on military infrastructure. La Carlota Air Base in Caracas, Libertador Air Base in Maracay, naval facilities at Puerto Cabello and La Guaira, runway cratering munitions, disable air bases. Anti-ship missile sites along the coast face targeting to secure sea lanes for follow-on amphibious operations, F-22 Raptors and F-35, as would begin suppression of enemy air defenses missions 6 to 12 hours into operations. Flying from bases in Florida or forward deployed to Colombia if basing agreements secured, these aircraft would hunt remaining mobile SAM systems and engage any Venezuelan Su-30 fighters attempting to contest airspace. Air superiority would likely be established within 48 hours. Phase 2 begins on day 3, amphibious assault and airborne operations. The primary objective is seizing port facilities at La Guaira, Venezuela's main Caribbean port serving Caracas, and Simón Bolívar International Airport at Maiquetía. Marine expeditionary units would conduct beach landings north of La Guaira while 82nd Airborne Elements execute parachute. Assault on the airport. Urban penetration operations toward Caracas present doctrinal ambiguity. U.S. military planning after Mogadishu in 1993 has emphasized avoiding protracted urban combat, but Caracas sits 15 miles from the coast, requiring advance through either the coastal highway corridor, mountain passes. Venezuelan militia doctrine anticipates exactly this approach, with prepared defensive positions throughout the route. The oil infrastructure dilemma complicates targeting decisions. Venezuela's petroleum facilities represent both strategic assets and potential humanitarian catastrophes. Striking refineries at Paraguana or oil fields in the Maracaibo Basin risks environmental disaster and prolonged production outages. But leaving facilities intact allows Venezuelan forces to implement scorched earth sabotage. Leadership targeting raises legal and ethical questions. International humanitarian law permits strikes against military commanders actively directing operations. But targeting heads of state remains contested. Eliminating Maduro does not guarantee regime collapse if military command structures and militia networks remain intact. Domestic political consensus for invasion does not exist. Without a clear national security emergency, congressional authorization faces serious obstacles. Progressive Democrats would oppose intervention as imperialism. Libertarian Republicans would question costs and mission creep. Public opinion polls consistently show majorities oppose military interventions absent direct threats. Once casualties mount and mission timelines extend, support collapses rapidly. Post-invasion Venezuela scenarios offer no encouraging outcomes. Best case, Maduro removed, transitional government installed, elections held within 2 years. U.S. forces draw down to advisory presence by year 5. Probability, low, given Iraq and Afghanistan precedents. Likely, Maduro removed, power vacuum produces competing factions, U.S. occupation extends indefinitely, insurgency kills thousands, oil production remains offline, costs exceed projections, mission objectives remain unmet after decade. Worst case, invasion bogs down in Caracas urban. Combat, Maduro survives and leads resistance from exile. Cuban forces engage U.S. troops. Regional states condemn operation. Oil prices spike globally. Occupation becomes generational. Commitment draining resources from Pacific and European theaters. Can the United States invade Venezuela? Yes. Military capability exists. Should the United States invade Venezuela? Every strategic, legal, economic, and political analysis suggests the answer remains contested, the cost potentially catastrophic, and the benefits uncertain at best. Capability without strategic wisdom produces disasters. The question is not whether invasion plans exist in Pentagon filing cabinets. The question is whether executing them serves any definable national interest that justifies the consequences. And on that question, no war game, no historical precedent, and no military capability assessment provides a confident answer.